by Magna Publications and the Teaching Professor newsletter. I'm Kelly for Magna Publications, and I will be your moderator for today. If you haven't already printed the handouts, you may do so from the link that is present at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please ask them in the Q&A box, and Brian will address them as he is able or at the end of the presentation. And now I am pleased to introduce Brian Uterman. Brian Uterman, PhD, has more than 20 years of teaching experience in higher education. He started teaching online in 2005 and has served as the Director of Online Education at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse since 2007. In addition to his administrative duties, he facilitates online workshops through the Online Learning Consortium, OLC, and is an alumnus of OLC's Institute for Emerging Leadership in Online Learning. Uterman has published more than 70 peer-reviewed scientific manuscripts, 5 book chapters, and 2 books, and has done more than 200 national and international presentations. We would now like to welcome Brian.
Thank you, Kelly, so much, and I would just like to start by saying welcome to everyone. Super glad you're here. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to facilitate this seminar, and I oftentimes like to start these seminars by just getting a bit of information or a bit of history about my institution. So I became the Director of Online Education at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in 2007, and that was after teaching online for a couple of years. And back in 2007, we had maybe 1 online degree and 1 online certificate, and we offered a few dozen online courses. And today, we're not a huge online institution, but today we have 15 or so fully online degrees and certificates, and we offer about 450 online courses a year. So over the last 10, 11, 12 years, we've seen pretty steady and significant growth. And I will say, maybe like many of your institutions, back in 2007, my institution was very focused on the 18 to 22-year-old traditional student. There was a lot of resistance to online education. Faculty were very skeptical of that, but we have seen, like I mentioned, some pretty steady and significant growth over the last 10, 11 years. One of the things that has helped with that is back in 2009, we hired our first instructional designer, and then 2 years later, we hired another instructional designer, and then 2 years later, we had funding to hire another instructional designer, and the University of Wisconsin system at that point got hit with a $250 million budget cut, so we weren't able to hire that third instructional designer. But those faculty support personnel that help faculty develop online courses and facilitate online courses they're just vitally important. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit later on throughout this seminar. We also offer a 3-week online instructor training course at my institution, and this is something, it's not one of the 7 things to consider before teaching online, but if you have not yet at your institution had a discussion about whether or not faculty would be required to complete some type of a course or training prior to teaching online, I recommend that you do that, and do that quickly. Many institutions have had that discussion. I think we had that discussion at our institution back in 2010 or 11 maybe, and really what brought that on, we had some online instructors as well as some department chairs who actually came to me. So it wasn't my idea. They came to me and said, we think it would actually be good for our institution to require faculty to go through training before they teach online. We have an online advisory group, which is another thing I would really highly recommend you have at your institution, an online education committee or an online advisory board advisory group. and that group took up that topic of whether or not training should be required. And there's a fair number of faculty on that group, and everyone was in agreement that faculty should be required to complete a course before they teach online. We made that recommendation. Again, this group is advisory in nature. We sent that on to our Faculty Senate. Faculty Senate talked about that, and ultimately, it was kind of a heated conversation, discussion, pretty contentious, and they voted. It was a close vote to not require instructors take a training before they can teach online. However, we provide funding for our instructors to develop online classes, so the amount of $1,000 per credit. Most of our courses are 3 credits, so an instructor can get $3,000 to develop an online class. And in order to be eligible to receive that funding, an instructor would have to first complete that training. So again, whether or not someone does training isn't one of the 7 things that I'm going to cover in the next 45 or 50 minutes, but if you've not had that discussion on your campus, I would encourage you to do that pretty quickly. And the last thing I'll say is, I've had the pleasure of working with probably about 300, maybe a little bit more than 300 faculty. We've had about 300 of our faculty go through that online instructor training course, and probably a little bit over 300 who've actually developed and taught their first online course. So I've seen instructors do it in a week or 2 or 3, and I've seen instructors do it, over the course of a year or 15 months. And many of the things that I'm going to share throughout this seminar really come from, the experiences that I've had with instructors and our instructional designers at my institution over the last 11 or 12 years. Really, the goal that I have throughout this seminar today is pretty simple. I mean, really what I want to do is just share some of the things that we've done, some tips and ideas that our faculty have used over the years to help them better prepare to develop their course and teach online. And I think it would be helpful on your end as we're going through these 7 items or 7 things to consider, before developing an online class, is to really think about what the process is like at your institution. So, and I understand this can vary widely, but kind of what's the average process like for a faculty member from beginning to end as they work on developing an online course? What does that look like for the average instructor at your institution? And then as we go through these 7 things to consider, just think about how might this idea be implemented? Would this idea or the next idea, work at my institution? And ultimately, I truly believe that these strategies have helped us here at my institution, and I believe that they can help at your institution as well, just improve the overall course development process for faculty. Before we get into kind of the meat or the content, I'm interested in asking you one question. So here's a polling question for you. And the question is, which option below best describes the online course development process at your institution? So hopefully you thought about that a second. And A is faculty perform the majority of the development work. B, development work is shared equally between faculty and instructional designers. And C, instructional designers or even instructional technologists perform the majority of the development work. And I will give you about 10 to 15 seconds. I will just remain silent to answer that question. So go ahead.
Brian, if it's okay, I just wanted to mention to the audience that you can find the active poll just below the Q&A box on your screen.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Great. Just a few more seconds. I see there's still some answers still coming in. Great. Thank you all for doing that. And Kelly, can you actually get that back to the slides? So we're going to close that out. And I can actually tell you the responses. So it looks like 61% of you said that faculty perform the majority of the development work, and 31% said the development work is shared equally between faculty and instructional designers. And that's kind of what I thought. There was a couple of you who said that your support staff, the instructional designers and instructional technologists, actually do the majority of the development work. But at my institution, certainly A is what we do. We have 2 instructional designers. We have over 600 instructors at my institution. So our instructional designers help our faculty, in regards to figuring out the learning management system and, proper ways to design and develop an online course and to facilitate an online course. And I think it is getting to be a little bit more popular, for there to be more shared work between faculty and instructional designers. But again, the majority of you in the audience today, 62%, have reported that your faculty perform the majority of the development work. So again, I think sharing some of these strategies that we're going to talk about today will be very beneficial for your faculty. All right, so let's jump in. Number one, the first thing to consider before developing an online course, and I think this is super important, and that's to really think about timeline. So how much time will you give a faculty member to develop an online class? And that first bullet point there mentioned, and I've actually looked but haven't found anything in regards to a standard or a benchmark, like you should give instructors X number of months, in order for them to develop an online class. And again, this is all over the place. Some instructors take 3 to 4 to 5 weeks. Some instructors take a year or longer. But if you think about it, there are many variables that come into play here. Now, most institutions have a well-established process of scheduling courses, and that often occurs, pretty far in advance. So department chairs working with faculty, maybe with input from department or from college deans, kind of know in advance what courses will be offered, what semesters, and again, that's done pretty far in advance. But sometimes, if there are department chairs in the audience, and I believe there are a few of you, you all know, and I very much appreciate the work that department chairs do. Things happen. Sometimes department chairs have to cover courses on very short notice because of a retirement or someone getting sick, and then they're kind of juggling. They're trying to figure out what to do, and that's not an ideal situation. One of the things, one variable that can come into play, kind of that polling question that you just answered there, how much help is provided? And that's actually one of the 7 things to consider. So I'm not going to mention a lot about that right now, but we'll come back to that in another 15 or 20 minutes. The experience of the instructor certainly is a variable that comes into play here. Is this the first course an instructor is developing? Is it their 5th course? So they've been teaching online for 8 years or 10 years. So as instructors become more experienced with developing, designing, teaching, facilitating online courses, that can potentially have a bit of an impact on how long it takes to develop an online class. When the course is developed, I've seen that be a factor as well. Sometimes our instructors, we again provide this funding, and many times they will carve out times where they're doing little to nothing else. So if they're going to do it during the semester, a regular fall or spring semester, it might take a lot longer. If they've carved out 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 9 weeks over the summer months, they might be able to do that a little bit quicker. And one of the things that we recommend, and I know that many institutions recommend to their online instructors, is that they develop their online classes fully prior to it being taught. So I'm not sure if that's something you recommend at your institution, but that can impact the timeline as well. So most instructors, not all, but most at my institution will have their class 90 to 95% prepared before they actually teach the class. And what that allows is for instructors then to really focus on teaching the course, on facilitating the course, on interacting with their students. Now that second bullet there, oftentimes what I see is, I mentioned we provided this funding, and instructors will have up to a year to develop their class, and some can do it pretty quickly, 3 to 4 weeks, and then some will take the full 12 months to develop the class. But on average, I would say most instructors will develop a class somewhere between 5, 6, and 7 months. So if you're just looking at, and again, this is just with past experience of working with probably 300 or more instructors who've developed their first online course, I would say try, if you can, to allow at least 6 to 8 months for a faculty member to develop a course. So if you're at an institution where you provide a lot of help, a lot of instructional design help, or production or development help for your instructors, then maybe that can be decreased quite a bit. And some institutions are set up to really crank out online courses, almost like an assembly line, where they have a process by which faculty can provide the content, and they've got designers and they've got instructional technologists, and they build the course out pretty quickly. That's not like that at my institution. It's in my experience, speaking with other online administrators, that's not the case at many institutions around the country. So if possible, again, in conjunction with your faculty, department chairs, college deans, if you can encourage instructors to take 6 to 8 months to develop a course, I would say at minimum that would be great. Now, that third bullet there, online course planning worksheet, this is something that you have in your handout materials, and I would strongly encourage you to use this. Print it out, look at it. You probably want to change it for your purposes at your institution, but this is something we started using. We developed it and started using it maybe 7 or 8 years ago at my institution, and ideally an instructor would complete this online course planning worksheet while they're teaching the same class face-to-face. And really it's pretty simple, and again, I would encourage you to kind of tweak it and make it your own, very appropriate for your institution. But, this planning worksheet just has a place for an instructor to put their name, the course name, and like the lecture or the week or the unit or the chapter they're covering in their face-to-face class. And then there's a section on content. So, this would ideally be done right after or shortly after someone teaches a face-to-face lecture or unit. And, what content was covered, that can be spelled out. How was the content delivered in their face-to-face class? And then how best could the content be delivered online? And so there might be videos, there might be, students might be doing different activities, but it's a chance to think about this particular chunk of content, this unit or this lecture, and then how maybe could I best do that online. There's another section in there about activities. So what activities were used in class? Were there videos? Did I have students do group work? And could I actually do those in my online class? Could I revise things? Could I create new activities that would be very appropriate or maybe even work better in my online class? And then the same thing for assessments. What assessments would be used to cover the content or to assess the content that was covered that day? And would those be appropriate online? Would I need to create, a new assignment or some new assessment? And one thing that I like on this worksheet is there's a section for questions. So did students ask questions or were they confused about anything in the class? And you can actually write that down and then respond to that, like, could additional clarifying information be added to my online unit or online module to help address those questions. And then finally, there's a spot on there for a general reflection. So any other ideas you or your instructors might have about how this face-to-face lecture or unit could be adapted, for online, and they can spell that out as well. And I think the instructors over the last 7 or 8 or 9 years who have used this and they've had that appropriate timeline developing their online course have really, really liked it. This has been super, super helpful. So if you don't have something like this or aren't currently using something like this at your institution, I think your faculty would respond well to this. And I think one thing it helps prevent is when an instructor goes through a process like this and is pretty reflective, and they're actually giving a lot of thought and putting energy into what would my online course look like in regards to content, in regards to activities, in regards to assessments. One thing that it prevents an instructor from doing, which sometimes happen, is just doing this dump, this content dump of my face-to-face class into a learning management system, and then now I'm just calling this my online class. So certainly what we have seen with our instructors who go through this process, and again, this is something that's done well before they even start, developing their online class. It's done while they're teaching the same course face-to-face. Just overall, it's a better experience for instructors, and they end up with a higher quality online course. All right, number 2, determine what content is most important for students to learn. So, that first bullet there, common course development process, I think back, I've been teaching in higher ed a little over 20 years, and I think about how I started teaching, how I started developing, my then face-to-face courses. And like probably many instructors, and maybe many new instructors today, will sit down and take a look at the calendar. How many weeks do I have in the class? And then I figure out, how many lectures do I have per week? So then how many total lectures do I have? And then I'll identify those lectures, and then I open chapter 1 in my textbook, and I start creating content to be shared or covered in a lecture. Again, this is the process that many instructors have used over the years. And again, I see this as being very common with the new instructors that we have that come to campus. And one thing, I actually work in a Center for Advancing Teaching and Learning, and we do workshops on this idea of backwards design. I'm not a backwards design expert. We could spend, if you had someone who was a backwards design expert, they could easily do a 60-minute seminar just on that topic alone. But I do think it's worth mentioning in this seminar because many of our instructors at my institution have done this and have found great or reported great success with it. So this idea of backwards design, many of you I'm sure are familiar with it, some of you might not be. It's when you, the instructor, really think about what it is students should know or be able to do or demonstrate when they're done with the class. So instead of going through chapter 1, writing down all of the key terms and writing down all of the key concepts and everything from that chapter, maybe you spend some time and you go through that chapter and you say, here are the 6 main things or 9 main things I want students to know from this chunk of material. And then you give some thought in regards to what would students need to do to be able to demonstrate that. So what would evidence of student understanding be? And then at that point, you can start creating assessments and you can think about coming up with the activities or the learning experiences that students would, partake in your class. And again, we do workshops on backwards design through our teaching center, and the instructors who come in, many times it's a very new concept to them. So that third bullet there is absolutely true. Some instructors find that to be very, very challenging because it's just something that they've never ever thought about or have done in the past. So, and for some instructors, especially if they've been around for a little while, they've been teaching for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, change can be hard. And it really does take time to do this on the front end. What are the things I want my students to learn? What would they need to do or show me, or what evidence would they need to provide to demonstrate that learning? Then how can I, start to develop my content or my activities? So it takes time, but it also takes mental effort as well from instructors to go through that process to figure those things out. But I will tell you, and if you have experience with backwards design, you probably have the same experience. Again, our instructors are very complimentary of this when they go through these workshops and they actually start doing it. And I have used it in my teaching. I've actually used it when I do workshops like this, instead of just starting to dump content down and, into a PowerPoint presentation or whatever it might be. Really give it some thought, like what is it I would like participants to walk away from when they're done, with this workshop. So if that's not something you do at your institution or focus on, maybe give that some thought. All right, number 3.
Brian, sorry to interrupt. We do have a question about design.
Sure, go ahead.
They're asking, are we talking about synchronous or asynchronous courses, and any specific platform?
Yeah, great question. So in my experience, in regards to the synchronous and asynchronous question, the vast majority of courses that we offer at my institution, and again, it's probably 450 courses a year, somewhere in that area, they are all synchronous. I'm sorry, they are all asynchronous. And that's having interactions with many online administrators across many, many, many institutions all over the country. That's the case. Most institutions, when they offer an online course, that course is asynchronous. Now, more of our instructors are actually offering synchronous components within their asynchronous class. But there are some institutions who run online courses that are fully live or fully synchronous. So the course is, offered or meets twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 3:30 p.m., and it's all live with a platform like Adobe Connect or Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate, or there are many, many of them out there. So the experience that I have, and I think that most administrators have, and most instructional designers, instructional technologists have at institutions, are with asynchronous courses. But there are some institutions, I've talked to folks within the past year, who teach all of their online courses fully synchronously or, in a live format. And really the things that we're covering here today, when you talk about platform, there's all kinds of learning management systems out there, Canvas or D2L or Sakai, Moodle. There are many of them. So the ideas that we're talking about today can kind of go across all those various platforms. So thank you, Kelly, for bringing that in. Are there any other questions we could address now?
Nope, she just wanted to thank you for articulating that question for her.
Great. So number 3, explore avenues to find course content. And, this is kind of an interesting one. I have, again, back in 2007, many of our instructors were kind of, very traditional focused, focused on the 18 to 22-year-old student, resistant to online education. And I see a trend now with our instructors as well as other instructors across the country that they're kind of going away, going beyond just simply adopting a textbook for a class and then using that textbook. So I saw something came out earlier this week, just a few days ago, I think, from the Babson Research Group, and it looked at the growth of open educational resources, which I'll talk about in a little bit. and it's been slow but steady, but the awareness of open educational resources is increasing. I think the survey that they conducted showed like a 12% increase over the last 3 to 4 years in faculty being more aware of OERs. And I think back, I had a conversation with one of our instructors maybe a month ago who has been on campus for quite a while, and I was a little surprised when they said, I would really like to not use a textbook, and I would only like to use open educational resources for my class. And the reason being, well, a couple of them. One, there's so much out there in this particular instructor's field, and I think that's probably true in all fields or many fields. And textbooks are expensive for students, and I can tell you that that's the case. My son just completed basic training. He got home about a week ago, started class. He's taking a diversity class at an institution in my hometown, and not at my institution, and he was reading a book the other day, just as like 2 days ago, and he mentioned the cost, and it was $110. And I know some textbooks are much, much more than that. But so, yeah, textbooks can be expensive for students, and I'll talk about that a bit more in just a few seconds. But I even think back to my teaching 12 or 13 years ago when I first started teaching online. I was teaching a health class, and I did have a textbook for the class. But I learned after a couple of semesters, like there's so much out there. I would send students to or get material from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or the Food and Drug Administration, the American Cancer Society, the American College of Sports Medicine, and I could go on and on and on. So I think there's a trend of instructors nowadays thinking about, what can I do going beyond just simply adopting a textbook for my class. And again, many instructors, I don't know if I'd say many, but I would say a lot, are actually thinking about this pretty seriously and teaching courses without a textbook because there is lots of material out there. And so OERs, or open educational resources, I think 8 or 10 years ago, many online instructors thought there was going to be an explosion in regards to open educational resources, and in some extent there has been. There are many resources available out there for instructors to teach their class, but really what an open educational resource is basically it's just digital content that's available for teaching purposes, and usually, it's released somehow under open intellectual property licenses, so which would enable free use of that material, whether it's a textbook or articles or papers or videos or whatever that might be. And I listed just some common OERs there. Khan Academy, most people have probably heard of that. My kids have used Khan Academy in elementary school and middle school and high school, and I know that we have instructors here on campus who use Khan Academy and videos from Khan in their courses. Merlot is a big one, OpenStax, OER Commons, some very popular ones. If you have no experience with open educational resources, I would encourage you maybe at some point after this seminar is done to just quickly Google common open educational resources or common OERs in higher education, and you will come up with a list of probably dozens. And in addition to things like Khan and Merlot and OpenStax, faculty are also using a lot of videos in their courses. So some that they create, that the instructors create, but many that they don't. And like I mentioned before, instructors often go out and find information or content from credible websites. That's something I was doing, again, 12 or 13 years ago. We have art instructors who are, using virtual galleries from around the world in their teaching of, art appreciation and other courses. So there's a lot out there. There certainly can be some benefits and some challenges to using open educational resources, and one of the benefits is it can, has the potential to save students money. I believe it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think it was in Inside Higher Ed. I saw a report from the North Dakota University system who over the last maybe 3 or 4 years have really ramped up their use of open educational resources, and I'm not sure, but it was a pretty large number of institutions and a pretty large number of instructors that were using OERs in their classes, and they estimated that they saved students, somewhere between $1 and $2 million from buying textbooks. So certainly one of the benefits can be a little bit cheaper for students. Another benefit, I think, and I've seen this myself, is you certainly can have access to more information than just what is in your textbook. And if you think about that, oftentimes institutions will allow instructors to adopt a new textbook every 3 years or 4 years or maybe even 5 years. So sometimes if you have a discipline where, things are changing pretty quickly, using OERs might help instructors stay on top of being current, with the content that they're sharing with their students. And it potentially can help faculty, save them some time as well. If I'm going to teach a health class and I'm going to if I want to create a video on cardiovascular health, and I want it to be 15 minutes long or 20 minutes long, by the time I create my script and figure out what I'm going to say and do the video and edit it and caption it, and my 12-minute video, it might take me an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours to actually create, whereas I feel pretty confident I could take 5 or 10 or 15 minutes and go find a really good, high-quality, credible video on cardiovascular health, in much less time. So some challenges as well, I think, with using OERs. One of them is, even though there's more interest in open educational resources by faculty, I think a lot of faculty still have limited knowledge of open educational resources, or it doesn't even click to some faculty like to not use a textbook because that's what they've always done for the last 10 years or 25 years or since they started teaching. So, but again, that awareness, I mentioned that before from that Babson survey group survey, is increasing. And just like it can save faculty time, sometimes it can actually be time consuming. When I first started looking into OERs, and this was a number of years ago, if you're not real specific on where you're going to and what you're looking for, and it's more like you're just out there surfing for materials, it actually can be time consuming. So depending upon how a faculty member goes about it, I think it can help them save time, but it could also potentially be a little bit more time consuming. So one of the things that we're doing this year at my institution through our teaching center for the first time is doing a workshop for our instructors on open educational resources. So something to consider for your instructors as well. All right, I think we're at the point. Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, and we do have a question. The question is, are these OERs peer reviewed? And how do you evaluate accuracy of content?
Yeah, great question. So OERs, are they peer-reviewed, and how do you evaluate the accuracy of what's in them? It depends on the various open educational resources. So I have on the screen Merlot listed, and Merlot, again, if you just go out and Google Merlot, you'll find their site and you'll find their process. But Merlot is one that is peer-reviewed. So Merlot utilizes experts in biology and psychology and all these different disciplines. And if someone wants to submit something for use, open use through Merlot, that gets submitted, and at least this is how it used to happen. I'm sure it still happens this way. And that material or that resource, whatever that might be, gets looked at and reviewed by experts in that field. and then if it gets approved, it actually gets adopted, and then it can be made available to their website or other materials or other routes. So that's a great question, but you would have to look at the various resources and see if it is peer-reviewed, and maybe that's one of the things that you as an individual instructor or you at an institution who are providing information for your instructors actually look at, and one of the criteria that you might use to evaluate open educational resources. All right, I am going to take a break, grab a little bit of water, just going to kind of be silent for 20 to 30 seconds, and if you have other questions at this point, feel free to write those down, and we will answer them as they come in. All right, Kelly, do you have any new ones? I'm kind of looking through them as well.
We do have one I'm sure you probably want to address later in the program in regards to the course certification.
Yeah, I'll just mention that. I'll mention that briefly. So we offer an online training course at my institution. Many institutions offer that as well. And there are professional groups or organizations related to online education that offer some training courses. And if you want, you can email me later on, and I can provide you with some options for those trainings or those groups or those organizations, associations. All right, well, if you have questions, feel free to submit them anytime, and we will continue to address them as they come in. So let's keep going. So another thing to consider before teaching online is to create an instructor participation plan. And this is something that I don't see instructors do very often, whether it's face-to-face or online course. And if you've taught online or you worked with instructors online, it can be overwhelming, and I think it's especially true for new instructors, although they're reading and they're responding to online forums and providing feedback. And again, rarely if ever would I see an instructor think about on the front end, before they even start developing their class, to create a participation plan. And what types of participation are we talking about? It could be all kinds of things, from responding to student questions to creating announcements in a class. Am I going to do that every day? Am I going to do 2 a week? Am I going to do 1 a month? I mean, in a way, that's participating, with students or interacting with them. Early alert contacts, is that something the instructor, are going to pay attention to and actually, spend time doing? Are you going to participate in online discussions? Are you going to summarize those discussions and send those summaries to students? Are you going to provide feedback for all of the assessments and assignments and activities in the class? Are you going to have online office hours? So there's lots of things that could come into play here. Are you going to do virtual exam reviews for your students? So thinking about what types of participation, how much time that actually might take. Our instructors have reported back to us when they've actually done that and followed through with that it was very helpful. And many times instructors who don't do that get into week 2 or week 3 of an online class, and they're overwhelmed by the amount of feedback that they have to give, the amount of time they're spending in online discussion forums with their students, but partly because they didn't realize what it would take. And, in some sense, you really have to go through it to figure that out. But if you could plan that on the front end, we've heard from our instructors that they're just more aware and then more prepared. And then that last bullet there, doing this, creating an instructor participation plan up front, I think really helps instructors clarify expectations. So what students can expect from an instructor. So just this idea of not being available 24/7. Sometimes I hear online folks say our students expect us to be available 24/7. That was not the case when I was teaching online. It's not the case when I facilitate online workshops. And I think it's because students know what I'm going to do in regards to responding to questions. If you ask a question, I'll respond within 24 hours. If you submit an assignment, I will grade that, have that feedback back to you within, you pick it, 72 hours, 96 hours, and participating in discussion forums. Some instructors, this is all over the board here, some instructors like to back away from discussions and not participate much. Others like to be heavily involved, but let students know what you're going to do as the instructor, and creating this participation plan can really help with that. Like, again, with the discussions, this is a big one because some instructors don't like to be involved all that much because they think then their students don't get involved as much. They let their students know that, I'm going to jump in a couple times a week, or if a discussion gets off track, then I'm going to jump in and I'll get it back on track. Or there's lots of, ways you can kind of deal with that. But having this participation plan on the front end can help an instructor clarify these expectations with students. Another thing to determine on the front end is to really give some thought to technology and what technology will be used in the class and how technology will be used in the class. So there's no question, at least at my institution, that first bullet there, I have seen a trend of our instructors using less technology. So 8 to 10 years ago, I would often see faculty loading up their courses with lots of technology, all kinds of Web 2.0 technologies. And I couldn't find any research on, is there a benchmark, how much technology should be used, how much technology are faculty using. But I saw a recent report, maybe within the last 3 to 4 weeks, that, there are a lot of faculty are still pretty skeptical of online education, and they're still pretty skeptical of technology. So it's not like there's full, complete, absolute buy-in from instructors in regards to using lots of technology in their classes. So I think over the last 5 to 6 years, what I'm seeing, at least at my institution and working with instructors at other institutions as well, is they may be using less technology, but that second bullet point there, I think they're using it better. So really think about, why are you using technology? Are you using it to support your, student learning outcomes, or to help students achieve the student learning outcomes? What is there meaning behind it? Is there some type of purpose other than you went to a conference and you saw, the latest and greatest from a vendor or from another instructor at a different institution, and you thought it was pretty cool and you want to use it in your class? And I do think that this is something that can be super helpful for faculty to think about on the front end. What technologies am I going to use? Why am I going to use them? And will they be beneficial for my students? And how, the most importantly is, how could I use a certain technology to help improve learning, or maybe instructor presence, my presence in the class? And I'll briefly say, having taught online for the last 12 or 13 years, that I often hear people talk about students today as being digital natives. But many of our students even today struggle with technology. So don't be surprised with that. If you're using lots of technology in a class, students can really struggle with that. And then, finally, certainly you could use technology to enhance student-to-student interaction or student-to-faculty interaction. Many of our instructors, in regards to student-to-student interaction, they'll have students do collaborative projects, and they might use Google Docs or synchronous tools like Blackboard Collaborate, or WebEx, or other tools for students to interact or have synchronous meetings with each other. And then the student-to-faculty interaction, I mentioned before, faculty oftentimes who teach online courses have synchronous office hours. or virtual exam reviews, so technology can be used to improve student-to-faculty interaction as well. All right, number 6.
Oh, Brian, just before you move on, I do have a couple of questions in regards to the technology. First question was asked, what do you mean by using less technology? And then the next was, won't the technologies used be affected by the diverse experience with online that students have?
So yeah, what I mean when I say using less technology, like certainly our online courses are offered in our learning management system, but I used to see instructors use videos and have students create videos and use wikis and use blogs and use VoiceThread and use Quizlet and then use Padlet. So when I say that, generally I'm talking about kind of the overall number of technologies used in a course. If you're using 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 things in a course and students maybe have to learn some of those new technologies, that can be overwhelming. I've seen it be overwhelming for both instructors as well as students. And so, Kelly, I didn't quite understand that second question. Could you read that again?
Sure. Won't the technologies used be affected by the diverse experience with online that students have? For Joan,
Yeah.
she also added that she has older than digital natives in many of her courses.
Yeah, and surprisingly, sometimes folks who are a little bit older are a little more high-end technology-wise. I taught a class one time to physicians, and they were incredibly well-versed in technology. But yeah, so the experiences that students have when they come into the course can impact, what their experiences are like with technology from instructors as well. So yeah, we can always come back to that maybe at the end. I want to get back to my points because we've got like 9 minutes left. So thanks for those questions. But I also wanted to talk about, one thing for an instructor to consider would be the workload associated with a class. And one question that oftentimes comes up is online development and teaching more work. And when you survey instructors, maybe about 70% of them, faculty, actually say yes. That teaching online, developing courses online is more work, but the research doesn't necessarily support that. There may have been a dozen studies, and about a third of those suggest that online is more work. Believe it or not, about a third suggest that face-to-face is more work, and about a third suggest that they're about the same. And I can let you dig into that a little bit more, but some possible reasons for the perception. Sometimes instructors might have to get familiar with an LMS or maybe a new technology. Sometimes they're developing their entire course before they teach it, like I mentioned before. Maybe they haven't prepped the course in a while. They've been teaching for 25 years, haven't prepped the course in 10 or 15 years, so that's a lot of work. So workload management strategies, I do think, can be helpful for instructors to think about and consider on the front end. So, reusing announcements is one, or reusing discussion summaries from one semester to another, reusing feedback from one semester to another. Certainly you would have to tweak those, but instead of taking 10 minutes to create something, you might be taking 2 minutes if you're reusing materials from one course to the next. Just what the course looks like. Maybe you don't need a discussion every week. I think the default that I see from many instructors is I have a 16-week course. I need to have 16, discussion forums, and that's not necessarily the case. Maybe you have one every other week. I've seen instructors have 2 per week over a 16-week course, which can be very, very overwhelming for them and for students. So there are lots of workload management strategies. Again, we could do an hour-long session just on workload management strategies. Some instructors utilize their students, so they'll do peer review assignments, have students review each other's work, provide feedback, make improvements, and then submit it. Some students, sometimes summarize discussions, or instructors have students moderate discussions. So the instructor is not necessarily doing that, but students are doing that. So there are lots of strategies in regards to managing workload. And I do think it's helpful for someone to be exposed to those and think about those before they actually teach. And that last point there is to think about other courses and responsibilities responsibilities as well. So, many instructors teach 3 or 4 courses. It can get to be very busy, so maybe stagger heavy grading periods for your courses. So instead of having a big paper be due during week 4 of your 5 classes or 4 courses, for one class it's due in week 3, and then another one week 4, another one week 5. So stagger things if at all possible. And even think about heavy commitments to like committee work, or if you're going to be submitting a grant and you know that you're a procrastinator and the grant is going to be due in the end of October, the week before that you're going to be swamped with that. Maybe just consider some of these other things related to workload as well. All right, and the last thing to consider is, mentioned this before, but I think this is vitally important. I truly, truly do utilize the available faculty support services. I talk to many of these folks, these instructional designers, these e-learning specialists, media developers, and sometimes they say I'm overwhelmed, but many times they say I'm very underutilized. I wish faculty would use, our services more. And one thing that we do through our teaching center is we advertise and market the services available. Who are our instructional designers? What do they do? We try and get them out in front of faculty, get them to know the faculty, have them do workshops, and then, how can they help instructors who are developing online courses? And then just share the benefits that faculty, can have or gain from working with those folks. And some faculty are resistant because they think that maybe these folks are just going to tell them what to do, but once they find that these folks can actually help them, many times they're open to their services. And these services could include individual consultations. We do lots of those. Workshops, our teaching center probably does 70 to 80 workshops a year, and then I mentioned that 3-week online instructor training as well. And you want to be clear to your faculty and your support staff, like what do they do and what don't they do, and a discussion of would you hire these folks in-house or could you potentially use vendors to do some of those services. And just a couple of other ideas, mentoring programs. Some institutions have done that where they provide experienced or pair experienced online instructors with someone who's just starting out. That can be a great support for newer online instructors. We do lots of online education showcases where experienced instructors provide workshops or trainings to other instructors. Kind of they're demonstrating or showcasing some really cool things that they're doing in their classes. And then another thing that we do is oftentimes someone who is interested in teaching online, if an instructor who's an experienced online instructor would approve, we could add that inexperienced instructor into the course of someone who has been teaching for a long time and actually get some benefit there as well. So just a couple final thoughts. If you can do some of the things, some of the 7 items, that I shared in this seminar, there's no question in my mind, I've seen it here, when our instructors do these things, they report that the course development process was less stressful. And ultimately, I think we see higher quality courses when instructors take that route, and it's a better experience in the end, not only for the faculty member, but the students as well. All right. Maybe a minute or 2 left. So Kelly, are you aware of any other questions that are lingering out there that I could address?
Yes, we do. This question, let me just pull this up. All right. We have a group of faculty in a struggling program, low enrollment, who are resistant to teaching online, and their reasoning is their students don't want online. This program enrollment would do much better online or even hybrid. Do you have any advice for persuading faculty to consider teaching online?
No, that's a tough one. One thing that I would potentially recommend in that scenario is, are the faculty actually just saying that, like the students don't want online, or is that actually the case? We survey our students at our institution and you know, we ask students if they want online courses, do they want more online courses? If they do, what online courses would they want? So that would be an idea, is to get a hold of the students potentially with the faculty, knowing that hopefully they'd be open to that, and just to see what the actual interest is. You know, one thing I did early on with lots of resistant faculty is you know, I would just share the benefits of online education and not, you know, push it super hard, but just share some of the benefits. You know, there's been thousands of studies that have looked at academic outcomes, face-to-face and online, student satisfaction, face-to-face and online. The vast majority of those show no differences. So that's a tough one. Been through that one before. So hopefully a couple of those ideas will help.
Right, looks like we have time for one more. Do you have any ideas about how to effectively offer experiential learning online, for example, a science lab?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know there are many institutions doing science labs, you know, through their biology department or physics or chemistry department. I don't have a lot of experience with that. We actually did a workshop for our science faculty last year where we brought in a couple of vendors. We spent a whole day with science labs. You know, they would bring in their experiments and the things that students would be doing at home. So I cannot provide you with a lot of feedback or advice on that, but I know that there are some institutions, and I run into folks at conferences once in a while that do presentations on the experiential learning like labs. So I would probably just encourage you to seek someone out who's got more experience on that than I do. And you know, we kind of ran out of time here at the end. I apologize. I was going to leave a little more time for questions, but feel free. My email, I'm not sure if we can share that at all or if Magna can share that, but if you want, I will share my email right now with you, and if you have follow-up questions, I would be very happy to answer those. And it's not uncommon to have follow-up phone conversations with folks after seminars like this, so that's always something I'm open to as well. So my email is buderman, so it's budermann at uwlax.edu. I'll say it again real quick, budermann at uwlax.edu, and I'm always happy to have follow-up communications and conversations with you. So,
Great, thank you very much. And if there were any questions that weren't answered, Brian has agreed to answer them offline. So look for an email from Magna with his responses in a few days. Your opinion matters to us. There we go. As we conclude the program, you will see a link to the evaluation on your screen. Excuse me, please click the link to submit your evaluation and tell us what you think of today's program and what programs you'd like to see in the future. As a reminder, later today, your campus will receive an email with the link for this presentation's recording. Complete information about our upcoming seminars is available at www.magnapubs.com. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.
thank you, everyone.